Hello and welcome to Alchemist.camp, where we level up as Elixir programmers by building things with Elixir and Phoenix. Though today we're not building anything, this is a Q&A, and it happens to be asked by this very same friend that I mentioned in Q&A number 2. His name is Julian, and he runs a very similar channel that's focused on teaching blockchain tech. You should totally subscribe if you're into that. He asked me, why don't you use your MacBook, or MacBook Air actually? He knows I have one, and it's not broken or anything, but it's been in my drawer for about 3 months, and I've been doing all my coding, all my screencasting, all my video editing on an Asus laptop. And there are a few reasons for this. First of all, I'm not a zealot in either direction on this, but I have kind of taken this long, winding path from Windows to Mac and back again, and I'll explain why. First of all is the screen size. I really care about having a larger screen because I think that's the single most cost-efficient way to upgrade your hardware to get more done. And the way that laptop screens or any screens are measured is diagonal to diagonal, like so. And if I had a 12-inch MacBook, like one of those new ones, that is actually much smaller than a 17-inch, like huge laptop. And it may not seem like it, but keep in mind that the area of a rectangle is related to the square of this diagonal. So say 12 squared is 144, but 17 squared is 289. So a 17-inch laptop actually has a little bit more than twice as much space as a 12-inch laptop. And I would actually use a desktop. So say you have a relatively standard desktop monitor of 27 inches. Well, that is going to be a little bit over 5 times as much screen space as you have with that little 12-inch laptop monitor. Now, as my old roommate Peter, who lives in Colombia, pointed out to me, muggles don't use PCs anymore. By muggles, I think he means people who don't code or design things. People are users of computing devices. Most people will just be on a phone. But I do code, and I do create stuff, and I want a pretty optimized setup. Also, it's a lot rougher on the wrists to be using a laptop. It's actually going to be rough on your wrists and on your neck. You should have the keyboard lower and the screen higher. And I've gone to kind of an extreme, and I've got like this super ergonomic keyboard. And this is because I had some RSI problems. And I've also got a vertical mouse, same kind of deal. Like that's going to be way easier on your wrist than a trackpad would be. In terms of ergonomics, laptops are kind of rough. So this is my old computer, like 10 years ago. It was a Windows machine. It was a desktop. And as you can see, I think it's probably only a 17-inch screen because they didn't used to be quite as big back then. And I was not a programmer. I used it to play StarCraft, and I used it to write blog posts, and like I used like MSN Messenger, and like I was a muggle, as my old roommate would put it. But over time, I got more and more into the technical side of things. Made some Flash games when Congregate had tutorials back in the day. And then after a certain point, I got into iOS. And around 2010 or 2011, I was really getting into programming. And I was working at a tech startup in Beijing. And they were making iOS stuff. So we pretty much had to be on Apples. It was annoying at first because I didn't know how stuff worked and I couldn't get all the software I used to have. A lot of times there's a pretty good thing available for free on Windows, and all the main options for that thing on a Mac were paid and tended to be more expensive. But after time, I got to where I was used to it. It was a few months, and when I'd go back to my old Windows laptop and I'd say I want to open a PDF and I hit spacebar, I'm like, what? Why didn't it open? My Mac, I just hit spacebar and it would open. But instead, I'd have to double click it and then wait like 30 seconds, well, maybe 10 seconds for it to open. And it was really annoying, and I found I just never wanted to use my Windows machine anymore. And at the same time, Apple was really becoming developer friendly. After moving to OS 10, all the Unix tools were there. They were doing things like supporting very developer friendly languages like Ruby in iOS. Like it was actually easier to use Ruby than it would be to use something like Java. Like you could use this thing called Ruby Cocoa, or I think later it was called Mac Ruby, and there were just a lot of developers that used to be either grudgingly on Windows or else on Unix that were switching over to Macs in droves. And the hardware was actually really good on Apples. Like they went to SSDs before others, and the OS didn't take forever to start up, and just a lot of stuff like that. After I'd been on Apple for a while, like I had like an iMac at home, and I had a laptop and an iPhone, just everything, all the things were Apple. But it's kind of started getting worse. Like I don't know if you know the site Mac Rumors. It like ranks all the Macs and iPhones and various stuff by how long it's been since they came out, because the price stays the same. If you buy whatever Mac the day that it comes out, you'll get like a new upgraded more powerful computer, and then people who buy the same thing a year later pay the same as you did, but you've missed out on like the year of progress, or you're getting it later when everything that's not Apple has improved in the meantime. I've noticed for the last couple of years, pretty much any time I go to the site, or maybe like the last 3 years, almost everything is going to be red or yellow. Sometimes like all but one of them will be red. And right now, like iMac, almost end of the cycle. MacBook is also the end of the cycle. MacBook Air, which I really like, and it was the only one that was like reasonably powerful and not too expensive, and had a great design. It was almost as light as the new MacBooks. Like that one's probably getting discontinued, and the last release wasn't much of an upgrade. MacBook Pro, which I used to use, we have a 15-inch MacBook Pro at work, and that one's been almost a year. And MacBook Mini, which used to be the budget option, is really gone. So now like the low end MacBook, if you buy it in the US where it's cheap, like this is the low end, and it's over $1,000, and it's really weak. Like it's weaker than the MacBook Air. The only big advantage it has is, at least in my opinion, the big advantage it has is a better screen, much better screen, but it's slower. You only have one port and a bunch of stuff. So let's look at what you can get now in terms of Macs. So the new thing is the iMac Pro, and I'm sure the thing is a beast. But if we look at price, like this, okay, 159,000, almost 160,000 NT, that's like 5,400 US dollars. Like that's more than the super high-end, gigantic Surface from Microsoft that has like the paddle you can put on it and rotate, and it's got like amazing stuff. And looking at the price of the MacBook, and that's like $1,400. And I know if you're in the US it's a bit cheaper, but if you're in China, if you're in pretty much anywhere in Europe, if you're in Taiwan, if you're in most places, Apples are more expensive. It's an extra premium on top of what was already pretty expensive. And I don't believe that the Apple lineup has been as good of a price performance option as it used to be. And finally, and the biggest thing from my point of view, is Apple is not as friendly to developers as they used to be. Like, they took away the escape key on the new MacBook. And I know that's very well tread ground and people have talked about it a lot, but if you can't feel where the escape key is, like that's actually seriously annoying, at least to me. And even if I weren't using an ergonomic keyboard, this would drive me nuts. And I just don't see what the benefit has been. Also, those function keys, like if you're using Firefox or Chrome DevTools or whatever, like you're using those function keys all the time. And it's not just a matter of this horrible touch bar. There's also the matter of how much RAM you have. Like, I have like more RAM on my Asus laptop than any of my friends who spent like twice as much money on Apple's do, because there are very tight RAM limits for most things. I'm sure the iMac is like the one option that gets you past that, but in terms of the RAM, in terms of the video card, a lot of specs that like you want to be more powerful. Like, you want GPUs if you're doing machine learning. You want GPUs if you're doing certain blockchain stuff. So the options are less and less available, even if you're willing to pay a lot, if you're a high-end user. Aside from that, it's been getting harder and harder to use Unix toolchains. Like, say if you want to use GNU plot or anything that requires it, which is really common in a lot of statistics setups. So like, say you've got RStudio. Like, last time I tried to use RStudio on a Mac, it was a horrific experience. And that was because of degraded support for GDK and various GNU utilities. Like 2008, I believe. I wasn't really coding that much then, but I know like 2010-ish, you could do most Unixy things pretty easily on a Mac. And then after a while, it was like, well, you have to install Xcode first. It's like, okay. Then, like, after another cycle or two, you have to install Xcode, and then a lot of the developer tools are no longer downloaded by default, and you have to check an extra box and download them separately. And then after that, it just became more and more ridiculous. And at the same time, Microsoft has been getting more and more friendly to developers. And one of the biggest things is Visual Studio Code. Like, this is an amazing editor. Not only is it an amazing editor, but you have a lot of support built in for Node and web development that previously I think Microsoft has always been really good to people making desktop apps for them, but web developers kind of had a rough time on Microsoft for a long time, and now that's not really the case. Well, there's a lot of pain with Elixir because it's newer and it's a smaller language, and most of those like core developers came over from Ruby, which was super Mac focused. But the trend is developers are getting more and more love from Microsoft and less from Apple. And Apples are becoming a worse and worse deal as they're extracting bigger margins. And I think actually that's true on their phone too. Like, I believe even in the US, the new iPhone 10 is like $1,000. So yeah, all these reasons have driven me to use Microsoft machine. Probably it was getting enough RAM and not having some of the previous hassles in dealing with Windows that I used to have before they had the like the integrated Unix support and the bash shell and all that stuff built in. So that's pretty much the way I see things going, but I don't ever want to get to where I can't use either platform. Like, I was a little bit worried a few years ago when I tried Windows 8 and I accidentally full screened, or maybe like by default it full screened the browser when you open it, and I like did not know how to get out. Like, I was like, how do I get to the desktop? I don't want to be like that on any machine because I might have to help a family member or a non-technical friend or something like that. But that's definitely not anything I'm in risk of at the moment. So what do you think? Regardless of where you see the relative merits of Apple's and Windows machines right now, what do you think about the long-term trends? Are you seeing the same thing? Leave a comment and we can discuss. See you next time.